It's hard to imagine that Hollywood hasn't jumped all over this. You would think it would be box office gold because it's part Spartacus and part Braveheart and part Amistad and part Glory with a little bit of Dances with Wolves thrown in. A story decades long of oppression and freedom fighting. I don't understand why there hasn't been more attention to John Horse and the Black Seminoles, but hopefully we can correct this.
I gotta keep my white privilege. Oh God, I'm scared that the black people gonna kill me. They gonna come get me. They gonna snatch me up the way we did them. They gonna do all that dirty shit to me that white people have done to them.
Here we have a capital woman and her 3 children, all in good health. What will you say for them? Give me an offer. I'll put the whole lot up for $850. $850. $850. $900 already. $925. $925. Whatever. $610 to the gentleman in green. Do I hear $650? Look at this lovely wench, gentlemen.
Got a mandingo! Purebred mandingo!
I want to see. This is what I was looking for, yeah. Oh!
There you are. Playful as a kitten, strong as a bull elephant.
Good Lord, man!
I don't buy the pig in the pork.
And Oklahoma is a unique space in terms of the number of African-American towns that were established. Some suggest upwards of 50 African-American towns. Between 1924 and 1928, Reverend S.S. Jones was going around documenting this sort of self-determined, vibrant African-American communities. You see the African-American educators, doctors, lawyers, landowners, oil barons. And I think that's what's so remarkable about this footage. To think that individuals, how many years out of slavery, are now owning oil wells that are producing 2,000 barrels a day. Is that not the ultimate American dream? Is that not the ultimate American story? It flies in the face of what I think some people consider part of African American history and culture. And I think that that was one of the things that Oklahoma and what S.S. Jones is really kind of showing is that African American history and culture is not a monolith. And in a way, it became kind of like a marketing tool to encourage individuals to migrate, to move there, that this is a place where you can live, you can thrive, and peacefully reside. There were still palpable racial tensions. There are lynchings, there's Jim Crow, segregation, there's all of these things, and you still have an African-American community, or many communities, that really speak to the fortitude and resilience of Black people in this country.
Old Satan was the slave master. Hell was being what's sold further south.
So in spite of the fact that the words were actually biblical, their meanings were very personal.
Dr. Norris explains that even though the words were from Christianity, these songs have their roots in Africa, where music was infused into every aspect of life. In the Americas, the enslaved Africans were forced to adapt.
They weren't allowed to use instruments they brought with them. They took them from them. So what, they improvised with what? Hand clapping on the side of the what? Improvised. I look at them and I marvel over how we got through all of this. But how we got through it all by what? Singing.
John Horse and the Black Seminoles deserve to be remembered for a number of reasons. They created the largest haven in the U.S. South for runaway slaves. They led the largest slave revolt in U.S. history. They secured the only emancipation of rebellious slaves prior to the U.S. Civil War, and they formed the largest mass exodus of slaves across the United States, moving from the Florida Everglades through Indian Territory, what would become Oklahoma, eventually locating in Mexico, where they secured title to their own land. It's a remarkable story. It's overlooked not just by filmmakers, it's not well known in popular culture, and in fact it's been overlooked by historians of slavery, if you can believe it.
Whitewashing is in everything. The media, the education, history is whitewashed and biased. Education is whitewashed and biased. Entertainment is whitewashed and biased.
Of the former slaves. In April of 1836, Black Seminoles and their Indian allies moved together to create what was the largest slave rebellion in U.S. history. This wasn't just a matter of runaway slaves. More than 385 plantation slaves ran away from their masters and joined the Black Seminoles, essentially in laying waste to the Florida sugar mills, which were some of the most valuable plantations in the whole continent. One Seminole leader at the time was the leader Osceola, who is justly remembered by history. Another leader who rose up at this time was John Horse, who was ethnically a Black Seminole, and who would ultimately lead his people on a long and trying exodus for their freedom. In 1838, John Horse and the Black Seminoles agreed to stop fighting the U.S. government in exchange for moving to what was then considered to be Indian Territory, which is now today the state of Oklahoma, and for legal recognition of their freedom. So despite the fact many of them were runaway slaves, they would have the opportunity to start over again as free individuals. In 1848, a decade after they had made the agreement with the U.S. government, the U.S. Attorney General announced that the government never had the authority, the power to recognize their freedom. And in fact, they were still, those who had been slaves, still enslaved. This was like opening season on them, basically declaring that they were there for the picking. And so they did the only thing they could do. They fled once again. Without security in Indian Territory, Horse and his Seminole ally Coacuchi promptly went to Mexico, where slavery was already illegal and had been for a couple of decades. There, Horse became famous as a general in the Mexican army, and his people found a way to make a life.
We're scared. We're scared of black retribution. We're scared of black vengeance. We're scared shitless, and we always have been. Since day one, we put our hands on black people. Grabbed them, snatched them up, put them on a boat, and made them our own fucking personal slaves and assistants for no pay.
And again, we just have a short time, and you do have specific proposals and policies, and I'd like to get to a couple more of them right now. You are a candidate who believes that African Americans should receive reparations for slavery, specifically $100 billion paid out in a 10-year annual installment of $10 billion. Is this symbolic, or do you think this money goes to some practical purpose?
This is not symbolic at all. At the end of the Civil War, General Tecumseh Sherman promised to every formerly enslaved person 40 acres and a mule. And those 40 acres and a mule would have given a formerly enslaved population an opportunity to reintegrate, to integrate into free society. What happened instead, of course, was black code laws were passed in the American South, which ensured subpar social and political and economic opportunities for the former slave population. This was not addressed for 100 years until the Civil Rights Movement. And while the Civil Rights Movement gave Voting Rights Act, although that has been chipped away since 2013, and gave a lot of political opportunities that had not been there for the 100 years previous, it did not address the fact that we have not yet paid that debt. Germany has paid $89 billion in reparations to Jewish organizations since World War II, and Ronald Reagan signed the American Civil Liberties Act, by which we paid every surviving member who had been interned during the World War II in the Japanese internment camps $22,000. Right. I believe $100 billion given to a council that would apply this money to economic projects and educational projects of renewal for that population is simply a debt to be paid.